That was the 80s, but now look at this crazy mess. We in the 90s, and finally it's looking good. Hip hop took it to billions, I knew we would. Those are the words of one of the greatest lyricists and frankly poetic voices of all time, Mr. Nasir Jones. But artistically, we know him as Nas. These lyrics were off of his critically acclaimed album, I Am, which debuted in 1999. That's right, over 20 years ago, Nas said these prophetic words during hip-hop's golden era when profits from rap music started to reach millions of dollars a year. And artists like Nas were just starting to reach global success that other genres of music already enjoyed. Since then, hip-hop has taken off to heights once thought unimaginable. Billions of dollars circulate yearly into an industry that has transcended American culture. Hip-hop is now as American as the Second Amendment. Well, almost. But during rap's meteoric rise, one can't ignore the misogynistic, grotesque, and utterly shameful lyrics that permeate the industry. Some of the most popular songs paint black people, especially women, in the most vile and disgusting depictions that someone could be called in any race. One might excuse these depictions as entertainment if there weren't so many examples of life imitating art. This feature isn't an indictment on hip-hop, rather a fact-based reminder that our culture has practiced what we have rapped for many years. The black culture's lyrical and musical gifts are so unique that black culture has and always will go as hip-hop goes. But along the way, repeated stylistic flows of such a great culture have been amplified by the damaging reality of said music in the arena of the world. As laureate Dr. Michael Eric Dyson once said, "How painful it must be for black women, many of whom have fought valiantly for black pride, to hear the dissonant chord of disdain carried in the anger epithet, bitch." He said this in 1994. It's safe to say that the word bitch has been used in a few popular songs in hip-hop since, but not to be outdone by the countless lyrics pertaining to violence and drug use. Proponents of such lyrics would argue that it's just music and should be treated as such. If that is the case, then we are now on the second generation of hip-hop and can study how it affected the first generation who are now entering their 40s, 50s, and 60s. If we so conclude that hip-hop is damaging to the culture, could we change mid-course and rid ourselves of such lyrics? Will the consumer even accept that? Do the people who prop up these songs and benefit from the bottom line even care? Because let's be real, the beneficiaries don't all look like the artists who perform these songs. With that being said, this is a Nacirema featured article, The Collateral Damage of Hip Hop. In 1998, a popular rapper laid down the following bars on a chart-topping song. Quote, "Me give my heart to a woman, not for nothing, never happened, I'll be forever mackin'. Heart cold as assassins, I got no passion, I got no patience, and I hate waiting. Hope get your ass in here and let's ride." End quote. The same rapper in 2017 rapped on his latest album, quote, "I apologize to all the women whom I toyed with your emotions, 'cause I was emotionless. And I apologize 'cause at your best you are love. And because I fall short of what I say I'm all about, your eyes leave with your soul that your body once housed, and you stare blankly into space, thinking of all the time you wasted it on all this basic shit. So I apologize." End quote. Same rapper, much different message. This rapper is legally known as Sean Corey Carter, but to most of us, we call him Jay-Z. The billionaire who rapped his way to success and now runs an empire of businesses that extend way beyond music into the world of multimedia, sports, and technology. The Jay-Z the world knows today is nothing like the Jay-Z we knew in the 90s. He has totally transformed into a model of rags to riches in the same media eye that touted his violent and misogynistic lyrics. There was a time in the not-so-distant past that some of us knew Jay-Z for getting arrested for stabbing a friend and being linked to a plethora of women. Now he is portrayed as a loving father, devout businessman, and activist. What is stunning is that Jay-Z's celebrity has stood the test of time in a genre where most artists don't. Recently, some rappers who have watched their lights shine on the brightest stages and most popular records are slowly and sometimes tragically watching the spotlight fade, their lives ending so much earlier than the estimated life expectancy of their respective generation. For every Jay-Z who is entering his 50s with so much to celebrate, there are rappers who seem to be living their last days way too soon. These rappers are, open parentheses, but are not limited to, close parentheses, DMX, Young Dolph, Black Rob, Heavy D, Nipsey Hussle, and Pop Smoke. They all died from a myriad of circumstances. Some have succumbed to the same violence they rapped about and thought they escaped when they hit stardom. Others bent to the pressures of drug abuse and never were able to recover. Regardless of the reasons they passed, hip-hop catapulted these men to financial success that most rappers dream of. But what their success didn't do was prepare them for the ills that would beset them. More broadly, hip-hop is still a relatively young music genre, having been created in the 1970s in New York City. It started after other popular genres had been a part of the American social fabric for decades. It also was birthed into the lives of many black men who were at war with their own country, as evidenced by countless rap lyrics that reference police brutality. In the rap group Main Source's 1991 song, quote, "Just a Friendly Game of Baseball," end quote, the group raps, quote, "Aw shit, another young brother hit. I better go over my man's crib and get the pump, 'cause to the cops, shooting brothers is like playing baseball, and they're never in a slump." These young rappers actually lived their lyrics and connected with the disillusioned generation who at the time of the birth of hip-hop was experiencing a steep increase in out-of-wedlock births. According to the Brookings Institute, at the time of the birth of hip-hop in the 1970s, birth rates among out-of-wedlock African Americans were skyrocketing to the point in which more children were birthed out of wedlock than in marriages. Simultaneously, African American men were being incarcerated at a highly disproportionate rate due to draconian drug laws ushered in by the crack epidemic. During this time, young men turned to sports and music to gain success, as some of the richest and most famous black men were rappers and athletes. What do you tell a young man whose fathers, uncles, older brothers, and or cousins have been affected by the, quote, "war on drugs," end quote? You probably couldn't tell him much because he knew what he saw around him and he knew the message hip-hop was conveying to him. Consequently, rappers not only became a sounding board for the neighborhoods they grew up in, but also a major influencer in the direction of many young black men. It certainly was, and in some ways still, very possible to see the lyrics sung into the ears of impressionable black youth mirrored in their financial decisions, family planning, and style of these youth. In short, if rappers said a certain clothing line was the in-style line to wear at the time, you probably saw many teens wearing it. What this did was create a sort of second or third parent in the minds of these youth and influenced a lot of their decisions. This isn't just true in black households, but also in other cultures' households as well. Open parentheses, see the CB4 clip on YouTube. Close parentheses. The difference is that white, Asian, Hispanic, and many other cultures didn't have to deal with the same gravity of black incarceration of their adult men as black people did. So what happens when an influential teenage boy listens intently to the lyrics of a rapper who he thinks of as a godlike figure? What happens when said teenage boy intently follows his favorite rapper's lyrics that could possibly include acts of violence, simultaneously bedding multiple women, and making financially suicidal decisions that he will never recover from? How much can we blame hip-hop for the finished product of these teenage boys who are now in their 40s, 50s, and 60s? These boys turned men never had the same staying power as Jay-Z and another rapper turned uber-rich entrepreneur Nas. These listeners may have turned out to be successful or unsuccessful, simply trying to turn art into life by mirroring these lyrics. First, we must examine if there is a correlation between constantly listening to negative lyrics from a rapper that equate to a listener following said lyrics. Just because in 1999, rapper Snoop Dogg rapped, quote, "Bitch please, get down on your goddamn knees, for this money, chronic clothes, and weed, end quote. Doesn't mean that every man who listens to this is parading around looking for a woman to give them fellatio in exchange for illicit drugs. I have listened to countless records calling women, quote, hoes, bitches, twats, and cunts, close quote, and anything else our parents have told us not to say. But I also have watched movies with white actors that make it okay to call women these names or date rape a woman and portray it as a cool thing to do. Open parentheses, see Revenge of the Nerds circa 1984. Definitely date rape. Close parentheses. Nor was it lost on me that many athletes were linked to bastard children, but were still showered with praise and money because of their athletic prowess. Open parentheses, quote, the Sports Illustrated article, Who's Your Daddy? Close quote, close parentheses. Can't the same amount of blame be linked to these other industries as they are to hip-hop? It's a fair question, but the biggest difference in those industries compared to hip-hop is that acting and athletics consist of performance that for all intents and purposes is not promoting drug use, violence, and sexual exploitation of women in their respective arts. Rather, the aforementioned vices are a byproduct of these industries that their performers routinely engage in as they have their miscellaneous reasons why. Hip-hop lyrics explicitly give instructions from rappers who keenly try to display their true selves through recorded ballads. They don't hide their true selves behind a movie character or a sports franchise. For example, we didn't know about Magic Johnson's sexual exploits until he was diagnosed with HIV. But we were listening to a recipe on how to treat women by the late rapper Eazy-E in his NWA song, quote, a bitch is a bitch, end quote. In this song, Eazy raps, quote, it makes him go deaf in the air, that's why. When you say hi, she won't say hi. Are you that kind that think you're too damn fly? Bitch, eat shit and die. End quote. Eazy is literally saying that if a woman ignores your introductory gesture or she thinks highly of herself, she is a bitch. Eazy didn't get his fame and make his money because he won 5 NBA championships like Magic. He got his fame telling impressionable young men that calling a woman a bitch is fine if she doesn't respond the way you want her to. Is this the way to convey yourself as a young black man if you want to sell records and become an international superstar? Imagine if I was a young man listening to this and I thought fame and success is the byproduct of following Eazy's formula. Rhetorically speaking, who doesn't want fame and success after growing up in extreme poverty? Then one day as an adult, I hear that Eazy is dying of AIDS after I continuously listen to his hit, quote, Still Talking, in which Eazy says, quote, because when I'm on hard, my dick's at least a yard. In the days of old, I was a nut. Now I need at least 3 holes when I fuck. Cause I do a check, nut 1, nut 2, then I save a nut for when there's nothing else to do. End quote. If I followed his every word to a T because I wanted fame, because I wanted money, because I wanted admiration, I could be in some serious trouble legally and medically. It's akin to the drug dealer in the hood who has the money, the power, and respect any young man who sees him in the hood aspires to. You see someone that looks like you, has the same story as you, and grew up in the same place as you, and it becomes very aspirational. You see the millions and billions these rappers are seamlessly in contact with and want it. You even notice that you don't have to be really good at their craft, as hip-hop history is filled with acts who are terrible at rapping but have crafted an image that makes them rich. It is seriously intoxicating, and then reality hits in the form of real news of rappers dying, being incarcerated, and going broke before you realize that a successful rap career is highly unattainable and may not even be worth the risk. If you were one of these young men in the 80s, 90s, and early 2000s, you grew up in an era that loved this music, but also learned of the real-life consequences of being a rapper. Some of the same rappers who told you, quote, done squeeze mad clips at these cats for their bricks and chips, end quote, were infamously killed at a very young age in a still unsolved murder. Some of the same rappers who rap to women, quote, bend over ho, show me what you working with, end quote, were charged and spent time in prison for sexual battery, rape, and assault. Some of the same rappers who said, quote, I wear 8 chains, I mean so much ice they yell, skate Wayne, she wanna fuck Wheezy, but she wanna rape Wayne, end quote, are the same rappers who have had their mansions and assets seized for non-payment. This essay isn't to shed light on rappers' hardships and troubles, rather an exercise to shed light on the still evolving effects of an impressionable youth's decisions that may have been subliminally affected by listening to their heroes. These rappers were reckless with their lyrics, but aren't necessarily responsible for their lyrics reaching these young minds. Rappers rap, and until recently, most didn't bankroll their own brand. Someone or entity had to push an agenda so radical and reckless that at this point, it should be categorized as negligible. Why shouldn't this entity be responsible if it can be proven this was done intentionally? With that being said, this brings me to the purveyor of all things hip-hop, the one entity that withstood any crack epidemic, mass incarceration, high school dropout rate, and violent murder: record companies. I can go to any park and pick up a basketball and start playing, but it's not until I play in the NBA where my game becomes magnified, scrutinized, and digested by the mass public. The same goes for hip-hop. Streaming platforms are filled with millions of artists who want the public to hear their craft. They could be rapping about green grass and daffodils for all we know, but it isn't until major corporations put money and marketing behind artists that we then realize how enormous an artist's reach can become. Record companies lavishly spent on the name, image, and likeness of the characters they sought to enrich themselves from. They bankrolled entire, quote, urban, end quote, music departments, hoping to strike it at rich from amplifying the words of up-and-coming artists. In this sense, record companies are like high-interest loan lenders. As an artist, you can become rich, but only after working extremely hard to pay off the principal and interest owed from the initial investment in you. They call this, quote, points, end quote, and artists who are new to the industry become very familiar with this term very quickly. Whether a rapper becomes rich or not, the lyrics being pumped out to draw in dollars live forever in the minds of the customer. These customers aren't monolithic. They are from all backgrounds and colors, but just one color and background of men have overwhelmingly had their tales exploited to the tune of billions and collateral damage that is probably immeasurable at this point. The grotesquely hyped up images of black men wearing high-priced jewelry with the cornucopia of women at their disposal was and still is the recipe for record companies to make significant profits. Impressionable young black men be damned. Companies were determined to make billions no matter the cost. Is it far-fetched to say that hip-hop played a significant role in shaping the lives of young black men? Depending on who you're asking, it might be. But no one can downplay the significance of a young black man's favorite rapper constantly telling him to, quote, flip bricks forever, end quote, or, quote, find a good piece of pussy and go all up in it. So if you're at a show in the front row, I'm gonna call you a bitch or a dirty ass hoe. The same people who denounce violence lavish these rappers with riches, endorsements, awards, and fame. They didn't care that these men would become fathers one day. They didn't care that they would have to teach the next generation that hip-hop is not the only recipe for success. The irony is that most who bankrolled hip-hop didn't look at all like the rappers they bankrolled. They look more like Jerry Heller than Sean Combs. They look more like Leo Cohen than Russell Simmons. They looked more like Clive Davis than Jermaine Dupri. The young men who didn't know what this non-stop gravy train of hip-hop would look like in the future are now in their 50s and 60s. Some are grandfathers and even great-grandfathers. Some are dead or in jail. Some are successful teachers, lawyers, doctors, etc. Some only consume hip-hop as art and never dare try to have their life imitate a very non-realistic reality. Early in his career, Jay-Z offered, quote, public apologies to the families of those caught up in my shit, end quote. He gave the public what they were craving and also offered a unique perspective on what he was feeling each time he put his voice on wax. He didn't hold back and in turn millions for himself and others. In retrospect, his apology might have been overlooked if he was a fledgling rapper. As I mentioned before, he used his last album, quote, 444, end quote, to mention some of his misdeeds. In 2010, Jay spoke to the Wall Street Journal about his mega hit, quote, Big Pimpin', end quote. Quote, that's the exception. I was like, I can't believe I said that, and kept saying it. What kind of animal would say this sort of thing? Reading it is really harsh, end quote, Jay said. Maybe because he did eventually, quote, give my heart to a woman, end quote. Maybe because he did lament, quote, forever macking, end quote, when he rapped in 444 that he almost went, quote, Eric Benet, end quote, on his wife Beyonce. Jay brought his early misogynistic lyrics to a much needed full circle. The impressionable black lives that were and are still lost to the negligence of an entire industry needed that. Too bad it took the same rapper record companies made billions off to self-reflect and apologize. We are still waiting for the record companies themselves to do such a thing. Open parentheses, we won't hold our breath. Close parentheses. We can safely predict that they will continue to push the Tekashi 6ix9ines of the world. Lyrics from 6ix9ine include the not so subtle, quote, now we catch him at the chicken spot, up a couple of chops, pop that nigga with 100 shots, end quote. But now we as the public know the results of such agenda-filled marketing to our youth. Hopefully they don't suffer the same fate as the budding superstar Pop Smoke did in 2020. Hopefully Destiny has, quote, mercy on many men, end quote, because these once young and future men need it. This has been a Nacirema featured article, The Collateral Damage of Hip Hop. Please subscribe, share, or post your comments. Always remember, power to the informed.